Hello. Today we will continue to consider thematics related to the state, statehood, and their interrelationship with society. The last lecture was devoted to the fact that the right statehood should carry the entire function of governance. If statehood is organized in such a way that its structures are not capable of carrying the entire function of governance, then there will inevitably be some problems with sovereignty, if sovereignty is understood as the ability of the state and society to realize the entire function of governance in relation to themselves. Well, if sovereignty is understood in a declarative sense, as a declaration of the state's independence from foreign political forces, and its unaccountability in the administrative sense, then there will anyway be problems with sovereignty, but they will be incomprehensible. However, if we build a very good structure of state power, this does not mean that it will work effectively, because it is not the organizational state staff schedule that works, not structures, not sets of duties, not subordination, who is accountable to whom, and where the responsibility lies for the work done and not done, but it is people who work in the bodies of state power. This is part of society. Therefore, it is far from being the last question. That is, the question of how society and the governorial core, that is, those who work in bodies of state power, are connected with each other, how society reproduces this governorial core, and in what relationships in the performance of duties, and in their free time, carriers of state power are with people, is far from being the last question. Statehood. This is a subculture of governance towards the affairs of society on a professional basis. Marxists do not like this definition. They insist that the state is a machine of exploitation and oppression by the governing class of all other classes. And they say, when communism is built, there will be no state. It will die out as an unnecessary thing. Unfortunately, if you stay within the boundaries of Marxist views on the theme of the state, its perspectives, then you can find yourself in the past and mess things up, repeating the mistakes of the past. Well, let us start from the fact that if we proceed from the definition that the state is a machine of class oppression, then the organization of oppression, the organization of the exploitation of the oppressed classes, the protection of the governing class from the oppressed classes are all governorial tasks. Therefore, we can talk about oppression, about the exploitation of man by man, about the right of private ownership of means of production as a source of exploitation, but anyway, all these tasks will hide behind these or those governorial tasks and ways of solving them. If we talk about the ways of solving governorial tasks, then there are three of them: structural, structureless, and on the basis of virtual structures. State power. This is primarily an instrument of structural governance. Along with this, state power is a generator of structureless governance, which is expressed in the cultural politics of the state, that is, how the state power forms the culture of society as an informational algorithmic system, in what directions it impacts it, whether it leads the system to blago or generates some problems in the life of society. Apart from culture, the instruments of structureless governance are also legislation and a system of standardization. In various aspects in different cultures, both are subordinated to state power. If society is considered as an object of governance, then there are 6 priorities of generalized means of governance in relation to this society. This is the priority of force that is understandable to everyone, then the genetic priority, which is not clear to everyone, but it's more or less understandable when it works for the destruction of society. If into the culture there penetrate all kinds of mutagenic factors which give rise to a decrease in the potential for personal development of new generations. The 4th priority is money, the financial credit system as an instrument of governance, economy, various technologies of governance towards the economy, and solution of various governorial and financial tasks. Above there is ideology, factology of all scientific disciplines, the ideas of how society should live, because if this or that ideological policy is carried out, it is always carried out, then a certain self-evidence is formed in the younger generations on the theme of what in the life of society is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and on the basis of this, people act independently, as if not dependent and as if not executing anyone's orders, but nonetheless finding themselves within the limits of the possibilities set by a certain matrix. Further, we have the historical algorithmic priority. It is expressed in the chronology of history, and in the present and in the future, it requires an understanding of the algorithmics that exist in the psychodynamics of society and the factors that are able to induce the self-realization of certain algorithms. The result will be the future that is programmed by this psychodynamics. Well, the highest priority is the methodological, gnosiological one. It is a personal gnosiological culture in one's own personal, cognitive creative activity, which enables one to detect problems, transform them into tasks, set these tasks, and solve them. If we consider state power as an instrument of governance on a professional basis, then we must take care that the state power is aware of what it does on each of the priorities of generalized means, what it can do, what it must do, in order that life would get better from year to year, and what it does not do. I do not presume to assert that this is a certain objective law of historical development, but nonetheless, in history one can trace such a characteristic feature that initially statehood was formed on the basis of actions, first of all, on the priority of force. Who can subjugate a society that lives without state power? First of all, one can subjugate who has sufficient force, which is recognized by others by declaration, or they do not recognize it by declaration. Then the carrier of this force can demonstrate that these are not only words, but real actions. If someone is against it, then these actions will be repeated. That is, the state emerges with the help of the sixth priority of generalized means. But state power and the implementation of it require certain skills, knowledge, and passing of knowledge in the continuity of generations. If a system of education has not yet been formed in society, education accessible to everyone, then upbringing, education, takes place within the family, and accordingly, one father teaches his child to be a potter or a plowman, and another father teaches his child to be an administrator, a military commander. And by virtue of this character, it is inevitable that there emerge a certain number of clans, which, in the continuity of generations, reproduces the governorial culture of the society, that is, statehood. This process, in fact, can be correlated with the fifth priority, genetics, because if this group behaves incorrectly, then new generations will biologically degenerate and turn out to be unable to carry the governorial culture, which was carried by previous generations. Well, if they are not able to carry the governorial culture, then, naturally, there will be some problems. And in such a system of power, traditions play a significant role. Just look at Russian history. At first, the table of ranks, not in the sense of Peter the Great, but in the pre-Peter the Great sense, is a table of the ranks of certain clans, their right to inherit the throne. Yes, this right is not exercised while the dynasty is in power, but if any problems arise in the dynasty, then the candidates to the throne arise precisely from this environment. This is one part of the matter. And the tradition of inequality of ancestral lines, the hierarchy of ancestral lines, the hierarchy of clans, this tradition on a certain stage begins to restrain the development of society and reduces the quality of state governance. Therefore, both Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great fought against it. But along with this, there are spheres of activity in society that speak about governorial qualities of people themselves directly on the basis of the result. If there is a result, if there are certain governorial qualities, and this first of all, if you look at history, trade, merchants appear. The merchant class transformed over time into the bourgeoisie. Well, in the bourgeoisie, the criteria for governorial consistency are simple. You have capital, you are a good governor. You have no capital, well, there is nothing to talk to you about. This is the fourth priority of the generalized means. If we correlate history with the hierarchy of the generalized means, Then bourgeois revolutions are revolutions in which this very class, which acts at the level of the fourth priority of the generalized means, declared its rights and capabilities, and put in place the class that, in fact, acted within the framework of the fifth priority of generalized means of governance, supporting the genetic lines of the governing dynasties, the rights to the throne, the rights to occupy positions in the state apparatus, primarily on the basis of origin from certain ancestral lines. It so happened in Russia that until 1917, before the February Revolution, this aristocratic principle was in effect, although factually, the nobility was biologically degenerating and turned out to be unable to staff the sphere of governance with the necessary number of governors in terms of number and quality. This ultimately led to the collapse of the Russian Empire. Well, the bourgeoisie was not homogeneous and did not really understand the whole interconnection of processes in which it was involved. Therefore, in the historical development, our country moved from the fifth priority of generalized means of governance, based on the third priority, bypassing the fourth priority of the generalized means. And Europe, after the bourgeois democratic revolutions, they got stuck on the thing that money governs the World Bank, and thick money bags are the de facto elite of society. Governing clans and financiers have already been determining for many centuries what happens there and how. Because if we again correlate with the hierarchy of generalized means, then the Great October Socialist Revolution is a transition to domination on the basis of the third priority of generalized means, when, in order to enter into bodies of state power, it was first of all necessary to demonstrate the mastery of the theoretical apparatus that described the life of society, described the state governance. Marxism-Leninism became such a theoretical apparatus in Russia. But what is important here is that it is Marxism-Leninism, because if we talk about the development of Marxism as such, then the development of Marxism after Marx and Engels is Trotsky, and Leninism is the application of Marxism to the solution of those tasks that were not posed by the masters and curators of Marx and Engels. And then Leninism transformed into the Lenin-Stalin cause. And the majority of Marxists do not understand that the Lenin-Stalin cause and the Marx-Trotsky cause are two different causes. But this is a special theme that takes a lot of time to reveal. Therefore today we will not deal with it. Maybe we'll deal with it in the future in the aspect of a historical retrospective. And then it turns out that cultural progress is the further mastery of the entire hierarchy of the generalized means of governance by society as a whole, as well as by state power. That is, this is entrance to the second priority of generalized means of governance, the historical algorithmic one. Entry into it requires the recognition that the Noosphere is not an invention of Teilhard de Chardin and Vernadsky, but a reality, a part of which is the psychic activity of every person. And accordingly, having recognized the existence of the Noosphere as a reality, a person should take care of his culture of senses and consciously comprehend what he senses and feels. And if he senses and consciously comprehends, then before him there should appear some images of what algorithmics in psychodynamics is in its historical form, what in this psychodynamics is capable of working for Blago, and what is not able to work for Blago and is fraught with problems and trouble if one lets things go on their own. And in order to solve tasks at the level of the second priority of generalized means of governance, and at the lower priorities of generalized means of governance, it is necessary to master what belongs to the first priority, the methodology of cognition and creativity. In terms of philosophy, to work out one's own personal, gnosiological culture, improve it, and pass it on to children. And to pass it on to children is, first of all, to pass it on in the family. Because when a child at the age of 3 years begins to cognize the world, then many questions of the so-called higher philosophy, which are traditionally understood as accessible only to the philosophical elite, should be available to the child, because at this age, he can understand many things easily, playfully, and then use them all his life, no longer playfully, but in essence, and very thoroughly and circumstantially. This is how the interrelationship between state power and statehood looks, as a subculture, with the hierarchy of generalized means in their historical development. Further, it's necessary to understand that if there is one culturally peculiar society, then its cultural peculiarity implies that it is not the same as other culturally peculiar societies. And in relation to each such culturally peculiar society, the same hierarchy of generalized means of governance operates. All three methods of governance: structural, structureless, and on the basis of virtual structures. Well, and accordingly, in such conditions, the discrepancy between the conceptions of governance in different societies leads to the fact that what from the point of view of one society is governance, from the point of view of another society, either this does not exist, or this is a weapon. Because if the conceptions of governance coincide, actions in relation to another society are support for governance in it. And if the conceptions of governance do not coincide, if the objectives in their setting of objectives don't coincide, actions in accordance with one's own conception of governance are de facto aggression or protection from aggression. And in this case, the terms aggression, protection from aggression, do not imply that aggression is evil. Aggression is an expansion beyond one's own jurisdiction, beyond that part of the planet's population that lives under the jurisdiction of a certain statehood and society, which has a certain cultural peculiarity. Whether aggression is evil or not evil, this is determined by whether it's aimed at the development of humanity as a whole, or it's aimed at the degradation of the society of competitors. Because if actions outside, which the enemy de facto considers as aggression, factually lead to the fact that in the society, objective laws and patterns, to which the life of people is subordinated, will be realized in the direction of the development of the society, in the direction of humanity, then in essence, this is liberation. Another thing is that liberation cannot be achieved with only the help of the sixth priority of generalized means. Because if we turn to our history, then the victory in the Great Patriotic War, in the Second World War, took place at the level of the sixth priority. But then, the fact that Nazism is reviving, both in Europe and in the societies of a number of former Soviet republics, in particular in Ukraine, in the Baltic states, is an indicator that the Soviet Union in 1945 failed to cope with the task of ensuring victory at a level above the sixth priority of generalized means in relation to the Western civilization, which is mired in oprobiousness and tried to liquidate our civilization in order to use the territory, its resources, expanding its living space. All the snot and squall on the theme that someone does not see the difference between Hitler and Stalin, and that Stalin is even worse than Hitler because he destroyed his own people, and Hitler foreigners. Well, this does not come from a great mind, but from historical ignorance, and moreover, from a non-understanding that the development of human society and degradation, they are objectively different. But the difference between development and degradation is simply not visible if you don't have any idea of the objective laws and regularities to which the life of human society is subordinate: biospheric, species-specific, socio-cultural, noospheric religious, economic, and governorial objective laws. If one has no idea about the content of the objective laws of each of these six groups, then development and degradation are indistinguishable. There is only a plurality of varieties, and these varieties are processes as a result of which some societies can develop and live in a culture for many centuries and millennia, contrary to the theory of passionarity, which limits the cycles of genesis to about 1,200 years, or can disappear during the life of several generations, if it grossly violates the objective laws of all six groups. And the fact that Russia is now dying out is one of the indicators that the bulk of the population does not live in harmony with these objective laws. But at the same time, it is also social hygiene, in which none of those will die who are protected by God and who carry the potential of development that will be mastered and passed on to their children and descendants. This is one of the aspects of the interrelationship of statehood with the six priorities of generalized means of governance and the six groups of objective laws to which the lives of people are subordinate. Further, questions about the interrelationship between state power and society. It should be clear that a society in the continuity of generations must reproduce the subculture of statehood. And moreover, statehood, in order to ensure an advance, or at least without delay to respond adequately to what is figuratively called the challenges of the time, must be competent. This leads to questions about what belongs to the sphere of so-called cadre politics. Cadre politics can be such that statehood, regardless of the declaration of democracy, people's power, everything else, observance of human rights, the civic character of society, can be elite corporate. The elite corporate character of statehood is de facto expressed in the fact that the cadre base, from which the cadres of governors are taken by the state, is not the whole society. There are social strata, from which, at best, only a few can get into the sphere of state governance. And there are social strata in which, if someone wants to get into the sphere of state governance, then for him this is practically guaranteed. It is important that he expresses his desire and passes a certain qualification selection at a minimum. But the minimum can be really very minimal. Because if the candidate for the position is only required to be able to sign where this will be shown on the document, and not to forget to go to the office and sign for the salary, and not to forget the PIN code of the salary card, then there is also a certain minimum of qualification requirements, although it sounds and looks ridiculous, but nonetheless it is so. This means that there will be others to work in the sphere of state governance. When I talk about the sphere of state governance, I mean those positions, the occupation of which ensures powerfulness. That is, makes binding the governorial decisions worked out by the apparatus. But in fact it may turn out that slaves may be the officials of the lower levels, the technical apparatus, history knows this, but the right of the powered signature, or oral order, belongs to the patricians. Yes, this is the state apparatus. But the state apparatus is heterogeneous, and there are positions in which the routine processing of information takes place, governorial decisions are worked out, and there are positions in which these governorial decisions are given power-wielding force by the signature or the spoken word of an official. When talking about the elite corporate character of state power, this means access to these positions in which the signature or spoken word gives power-wielding force to orders, governorial decisions, which are not necessarily worked out by the person who puts his signature or says, so be it. What are the consequences for a society of the elite corporate character of state power in the sense that I have just defined it? As the social organization becomes more complex, as the economy becomes more complex, problems arise. Problems related to the fact that a narrow corporation that forms state power is unable to provide society with the number of professional governors necessary for effective governance. Yes, it is possible to replace all positions with those born in elite clans, but far from all of those appointed to these positions will have a culture of senses, a culture of intellectual activity, knowledge, skills, self-discipline, enabling them to effectively carry out everything that these positions require. Accordingly, if there is a shortage of professionally consistent governorial cadres, there will be a decrease in the quality of governance if the historical situation develops in such a way that a certain number of governorial cadres is required, and an elite corporation is not able to provide this number of cadres at the proper level, then there are two variants. Either the elite corporation will bring this state to a collapse, and if the society does not perish as a result of intervention and occupation, then people not from this elite corporation will themselves come to power, and they will expand the cadre base of the governorial corps so as to staff the sphere of governance with the necessary number of professionally consistent governorial cadres. Then the question will arise, what will happen in the next generations? The first generation of governors will give rise to a new elite corporation, which will enclose into itself from society, or will not create a new elite corporation, but will take care that the entire society is the cadre base of the sphere of governance, state and business governance. In this case, if there are no class-clan prejudices, predispositions, unconsciously automatic skills, when only one's own relatives, friends, and loved ones turn out to be smart people from the point of view of the carrier of power, and everyone else, due to his evaluations, does not meet the requirements for the positions held, then in this case, society has the possibility to ensure the formation of the most competent and capable governorial corps, both in the sphere of state power and in the sphere of governance towards the economy. These are different spheres, although they interact with each other. If society for some reasons is not capable of this, and if the state power is of an elite corporate character, society is inevitably doomed to face the abuse of power by the elite. The elite, as a rule in history, takes shape as a certain social class. And abuse by this social class in relation to the rest of society in Marxism is interpreted as the class character of the state. As a result of these abuses, the state is understood exclusively as an apparatus, as a machine of oppression by the governing class of all other classes. But in reality, it is simply a consequence of the fact that the state is of an elite corporate character. Moreover, if we talk about the elite corporate character of state power, then it is not obligatory that the state is formed on class principles. State power can also be formed on mafia principles, when representatives of different classes are members of the mafia. And in this case, the mafia controlling the state, factually not being a class in the Marxist understanding of this term, provides a certain mode of state governance and abuse of power in relation to all those who are not part of this mafia, or are not mainly, for various reasons, necessary for the mafia's needs under the protection of this mafia. The mafia is traditionally understood as criminal structures that are involved in banditry, murder, drug trafficking, guardianship of prostitution, sex industry, and everything else. But with a broader view, the mafia is an unformalized system of interrelationships between people based on the principle of compatibility of some interests. Since the system is not formalized, then in it, there is a flexible, dynamic distribution of responsibilities and duties, although some more or less stable connections may be present in it. That is, a structure takes shape. But by virtue of the fact that the system as a whole is subordinated to certain interests, these interests can be stable in the continuity of generations, or they can change over time. In fact, it turns out that the mafia in this sense does not imply the inheritance of positions upon birth in a particular family. The dynamic distribution of duties, powers, responsibility, and everything else, a certain corporative character of such a formation, leads to the fact that mafias are more effective than structures, which are enslaved by established traditions and claims. And you see, speaking in essence, the unformalized interrelationships of people with each other are the norm of life. You can't get away from this. You can't ban them, you can't eradicate them. Yes, some of them are episodic, random, some are systemic, but systemic not in the sense that we communicate, discuss, report every day and so on, but in the sense that if the processes flow and people participate in them, these processes are of some interest to every one of them. But while these processes exist, people are included in this dynamic system of distribution of responsibilities, duties, and everything else. In this sense, mafia is just a short word that does not carry any negative semantic load, because any system with a dynamic distribution of duties, powers, and everything else, one must either say many words characterizing it in this quality, or use this term, mafia, which characterizes this type of system, but on the basis that a certain criminal character of their activity is revealed. And if we understand the word mafia precisely in this sense, as a system with a dynamic distribution of duties and powers, conditioned by some interests that are stable enough for people to enter into the system for a more or less long period of time, then it turns out that when we consider state governance, then we can't get away from this. We see two layers. The first layer is the organizational staff structures of bodies of state power. Within each organizational staff structure, there is a person who has the right to sign or telephone right on behalf of the legal entity of this structure. And there is a certain apparatus that works and provides the first person of this structure with all the necessary information in order for this structure to perform the functions that it should perform in the system of bodies of state power. Such structures form what is called a vertical of power. Although, by and large, this is not a vertical of power, but a certain pyramidal network, which from the center of general state significance extends to all regions of the state, and has in these regions its periphery, the activities of which are limited by them in the territories of these regions, since there are similar structures in neighboring regions that perform the same governorial functions, taking into account regional specifics. These structures are described quite properly by the functional tasks that are set before the bodies of state power, organizational staff structures in them, a set of duties at all levels, but it is people, however, who work, and not organizational staff structures. And if it is people who work, this means that organizational staff structures are permeated by mafias. I emphasize again, not necessarily criminal mafias, that is, those who pursue this or that antisocial politics. And the understanding of this situation by the members of the mafia is conditioned by the system of informal communication of people belonging to different structures or abiding within the same structure, in which there is a dynamic distribution of responsibilities conditioned by the current state and how the participants of each of the mafia perceive the situation in the country, in the world, and the prospects for the development of this situation, because the character of responsibilities are dictated by the situation. Therefore, mafias, in this understanding, can be divided into two groups, two classes. Mafias that conduct antisocial activities, anti-state activities. Moreover, antisocial and anti-state activities are not always the same, because if the state is anti-people, then an anti-state mafia can express the interests of society, the interests of social development, but it will work against the existing statehood that governs society. There may be antisocial mafias as well, and a certain number of antisocial mafias may be part of the historically formed statehood. But besides that, there may be mafias that are loyal to the state in the form in which it has taken shape. These mafias carry out certain activities without thinking about the prospects of society, the objectives towards which the historically formed statehood works. And in fact, all this inevitable character of the inclusion of heterogeneous mafias in state activities leads to the fact that all these unformalized formations within the limits of state power, they must be correlated with the fact that development and degradation are objectively different. And accordingly, which of these groups work for the development of society, which for degradation, and which groups in some aspects work for development, and in some other aspects work for degradation. And among other things, all these groups, if they are detected, must be correlated with the hierarchy of generalized means of governance. That is, within which groups they work, within which priorities of generalized means they work, because in fact there are groups whose interests do not go beyond the sixth priority. There are groups that do not go beyond the sixth and fifth priorities. There are groups that do not go beyond the sixth, the fifth and fourth priorities. Well, further it turns out that there are groups that rise to a higher level. Those who work in the sixth, the fifth and the fourth priorities, for them, well, simply due to historical development, cultural characteristics, world perception and world understanding, money is the head of everything. For them, money talks. If you have money, if you control certain financial resources, then everything is fine. And the point generally is to have enough money in order to live the way you want. Money can be obtained in different ways. By force, via a criminal business with a very high profitability, or one can operate in a legal business. The most legal business, this is the banking sector. Of course, not as a clerk at a bank counter, but as those who control the banking sector. And then the question arises, what happens up there? Up there is a feeling which is expressed in the phrase, money is a bad master, but a good servant. To put it another way, if people reach the level of the third priority and higher in their world understanding, then the sixth, the fifth, the fourth priorities are the instruments that are under them, and they themselves do not need to descend to these levels unless absolutely necessary. Therefore, another mafia takes shape, which is not perceived by society as a mafia. There are certain groups of intellectuals who work on the third priority of the generalized means, rarely rising to the second. Well, in historically formed crowd elite cultures, they are not allowed to the first priority, because the first priority is absolutely another theme, because the first priority is the source of sovereignty in its entirety as the ability to govern according to the entire function. And if we turn to real history, then in European civilization, in America, the main mafia which works on the third priority is freemasonry. But when there is a public appeal to the theme of Freemasonry, a quite large number of the public reacts to it like this. This is a conspiracy. This is the nonsense of schizophrenics and idiots. What can one say? You can, of course, limit yourselves to Vasyoloshkin's caricatures on the theme. Masons dictate a vodka recipe to Mendeleev. Masons invent rock and roll. Masons explain to Marx the mystical aspect of materialism. Or you can look into the great Soviet encyclopedia, the article Freemasonry. Look into other encyclopedias. From there you can learn that Freemasonry pursues a utopian objective, the unification of all mankind into a single state, in which brothers Masons are engaged in certain enlightening missions, or in the end the whole society is integrated into the structure. You see, the article in the Great Soviet Encyclopedia is interesting in two aspects. Firstly, it explicitly declares that Freemasonry works towards globalization, towards the completion of globalization in a certain form, reducing national states to the role of regional administrations. We should not be engaged in politics as such, politics is not their business, but in the provision of life for the population, and governance towards everyday life things. And on the other hand, this objective is characterized as a utopian one. Most will agree with this characterization, because it corresponds to their ideas about governance as such, because all attempts to expose this very conspiracy boil down to trying to reveal structures. But those people ignored structureless governance. And structureless governance is based on the fact that the culture of society is an informational algorithmic system, and structureless governance flows as a certain psychodynamic process on the basis of the information and algorithmics that exist in culture, and which every individual in the entire plurality has perceived from this culture something of his own. As a result, his personal culture arose as a superstructure over a set of instinctive programs and unconditioned reflexes with which he was born. If you understand what structural governance is, what structureless governance is, what governance on the basis of virtual structures is, if you see the hierarchy of generalized means of governance, feel the psychodynamics of society, analyze it, know the objective laws of all 6 groups, then it turns out that the objectives are not utopian, and the objectives are quite real. Globalization is real. It is objectively inevitable, by strength of the biological unity of mankind, by strength of the fact that there is cultural exchange. Another question: at what speed does cultural exchange take place? It is clear that in the era of the internet, civil and military aviation, cultural exchange occurs faster than in those days when the main means of transportation on land was a horse or one's own legs. And as for sea travel, they didn't travel at all, or there was a 20-meter-long paddle boat that traveled along the coast, and on which it was scary to go beyond the visibility of the land, not even because the weather may be bad, but because one really did not know where to go. In general, the problems of many states are that formal democracy, universal suffrage, organization of procedures for election to parliament, organization of procedures for electing heads of state, all these procedures actually turn out to be controlled by some internal domestic mafias, both in Western culture, and wherever it penetrates, one of these mafias becomes Freemasonry, and in fact, everyone lives under the conditions of a real dictatorship of this very Masonic mafia, which covers its dictatorship with formal democratic procedures, because the crowd is not capable of self-organization, of singling out intelligible governors from its ranks. And this is expressed in the famous caricature. There are 2 counters. Helms hang on the walls behind one counter, and paddles hang on the walls behind the other. There is a huge line to buy the helms, and there is no one who wants to buy a paddle. This is reality. If the crowd is left to itself, then it falls into a complex. Who are you? Why should we obey your orders? The crowd does not want to go into the meaning of these very orders, and does not want to carry them out, because these are other people's orders. And I am smart myself. I have a different opinion on this matter. And in order for the crowd to work as needed, an organizing and directing force is required. In Western culture, the organizing and directing force is the Freemasonry mafia, which controls the third priority, and partly the second priority of the generalized means, in a monopolistic mode. Well, since the fourth, the fifth, and sixth priorities are under the third one, the opinion of the crowd is formed through ideologies, through the manipulation of information flows in the mass media, through the organization of blogging on the internet, after which the crowd votes as needed. And this is a real historical fact, because without internal mafias, no state power is functionally operable. The emergence of internal mafias is inevitable simply due to the fact that people communicate with each other. People have more or less stable interests. These interests somehow mutually correspond to each other, as a result of which unformalized connections arise, and these connections are stable. And one of the historically real mafias that governs Western civilization is Freemasonry. Other cultures also have their own esoteric subcultures. That is, subcultures not for everyone. Subcultures that deal with the first stages of the entire function of governance. That is, prognostics, setting of objectives, formation of a conception, the introduction of the conception of governance in society into the practice of state governance. But if society lives on the principles of crowd elitism, that is, there are certain groups that believe we are better than them, then on this principle, we are better than them, all such mafia political subcultures unite together with each other and cooperate. Therefore, even if there is no direct penetration, that is, contacts of representatives of Western Freemasonry with the national esoteric subcultures, their mafias, and there are some common interests, structureless governance and governance on the basis of virtual structures enables one to subjugate any such national esoteric subculture to oneself, on condition that this national subculture does not have an alternative to the biblical project of the implementation of globalization, because if it has a project of its own, then interaction turns out to be impossible, since there arises the question, whose project is better? And since brothers Masons are not allowed on the first priority, moreover, they are not allowed not by administrative prohibitions, but by casting, in the process of inviting them to lodges. If a person does not carry an appropriate cognitive creative culture, then with certain skills and knowledge, with a certain system of social connections, he represents interests. He can be invited to the system of initiation. But if he carries a certain subculture that belongs to the level of the first priority, then in crowd elite societies, such people are very few in numbers, and it's assumed that he alone, against the organized system of the state, controlled by the mafias, which in state power all act even under the organized mafia, which is engaged in the process of globalization, then such very few in numbers people in fact can do little against this system. Therefore they are of no interest at all to anyone. And when something doesn't work, they simply get rid of such people, like Pushkin, Lermontov, and some others. Well, if people are protected by God, then it is not possible to get rid of them. And then there arise problems such as Islam, or problems such as Genghis Khan, who blocked the spread of the biblical culture and the biblical project of globalization to vast regions of the planet, thereby creating a certain problem for the masters of the biblical project. There is one more question connected with statehood and its relationship with society. After the Peace of Westphalia, a system of nation-states took shape in Europe. And in the European tradition and in many European languages, the term nation and the term state are one and the same. In the nation-states of Europe, well, at least before the start of mass migration from Africa and Muslim regions, around the 1980s and actively in recent decades, the national structure of society was very simple. The titular nation that gave the name to the state and a number of national minorities. National minorities were of two different categories. Either it was national minorities in the border zones, which were the titular nations in neighboring states, because in the era before the formation of states in the modern sense, national cultures formed in the regions of their formation, and when they came into contact, there appeared stripes of interethnic demarcation. These stripes of interethnic demarcation could be very narrow, in the form of a river or a mountain ridge, and where geographical factors did not prevent the penetration of people, stripes with mixed populations appeared, and moreover, mixed in different ways. The stripes of interethnic demarcation could be such that in one village, settlement, or city, mostly one ethnic people lived, in another, mostly others. It could be that in one settlement there were neighborhoods inhabited by some, there were neighborhoods inhabited by others. But there could also be a mixed population, where without a certain demarcation, people of different nationalities lived together. Well, in fact, the borders of states in their modern form passed along the lines of interethnic demarcation, due to which representatives of neighboring states, their titular nations, could appear in the border zones. And the second group of ethnic minorities is diasporas. That is, these are people belonging to ethnic cultures that are not typical for a given state, whose regions of the formation of national cultures are far beyond the borders of this state or have ceased to exist. Well, for example, in the states of Europe there are powerful Armenian diasporas. Where is the state of Armenia located? Far away. The region of the formation of Jewish culture did not exist for a long time as a Jewish nation-state. Moreover, even after it arose and took shape as modern Israel, many historians insist that in ancient times there was neither Judea nor Israel, and Judea and Israel were somewhere in other geographical locations, and these geographical locations, in fact, are alternative to Israel, located in different places, from Italy to the outskirts of St. Petersburg. But nonetheless, diasporas also exist. Further, questions arise about how multinational states take shape. Russia is a multinational state. Therefore, the European approach, when the nation and the state are synonyms, is not implementable in Russia. We have more than 100 nationalities living in one country. Yes, they are of different numbers, but nevertheless, they have a cultural peculiarity and live within the same state. Moreover, if you look at the historical past, the Soviet Union was a one-union state. In it, national republics were also states. Well, there were nations that did not form their own state, and, living in a multinational state, they retained their peculiar culture. That is, our reality, historical past, and our political modernity, in fact do not fit into this concept of nation-state, which is formed in Europe. And moreover, the European Union, as a political entity, is hopeless until such time as Western sociology uses the term nation in the sense of state, and state in the sense of nation, because a national peculiarity does not exist. If, for some reason, it turns out that many peoples live under the rule of one state, then the question arises, in what relations can each of these people find themselves with this state? There are also many variants here, because it may turn out that a certain imperial nation is the cadre base for the formation of the governorial core of this state power under which the peoples live. Representatives of other peoples, who are not an imperial nation, cannot enter into bodies of state power en masse as officials, whose power-wielding signature and word impart the character of binding to governorial decisions. Examples of this kind: Austria-Hungary. For a long time Austria was an empire. Then the Hungarians also joined the imperial level, but the Czechs, Slovaks, were believed, along with some others who ended up in this territory, to have been second-sort people. The same was in Turkey. Everything was different in the Russian Empire. If we look at the life of Russia after Ivan the Terrible had conquered Kazan, we find that the Russian governing elite, especially the imperial elite, included representatives of all peoples who lived in the territory of the Russian Empire. If someone was not there, then it was not as a result of politics that they were not allowed in, but mainly as a result of the cultural unpreparedness of some national elites to enter into the imperial elite. But such things were overcome during the life of several generations, when the children of national elites, not because the imperial authorities wanted it, but because their parents also wanted it, entered educational institutions of the imperial level. Then they served the Russian Empire, received the corresponding ranks, positions, and then their children were already an organic part of the imperial elite. Therefore, if you look at the origin of the surnames of the governing elite of the Russian Empire, In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, almost all the nations that had become part of the Russian Empire were represented there. Another thing is that the ordinary people, Great Russians, Little Russians, Belarusians, and ordinary people of other nations could hardly enter the imperial elite, since the strata caste character of the social organization of the Russian Empire was a historical fact. But then, in the Soviet times, strata caste barriers were removed, and representatives of different peoples entered. In relation to Stalin's era, it would be wrong to say Soviet elite. But the highest levels of state power, in the economy, in science, were filled with representatives of different nationalities, and de facto the Soviet Union was a multinational state, for the peoples of which it was a common statehood, which represented for them a certain value. But when in post-Stalinist times the elite began to form, the Soviet Union was of no value to it. First of all, because they were too feeble-minded to govern such a superpower, and hence Stalin was right. Nationalism is always petty bourgeois. When it arose as petty bourgeois, it took shape as nationalism-separatism, and national elites split the Soviet Union, contrary to the opinion of the ordinary people who were brainwashed during the years of perestroika and before that. However, in the referendum on March 17, 1991, everyone voted for the unity of the country. There were relatively few exceptions. The exceptions, again, were not independent, and the exceptions were purpose-orientedly formed, including with the multi-decade support of nationalism by the KGB of the USSR. Well, at least since the time of Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. Therefore, it is wrong to say that the people somewhere voted, by their own free will and their own reasoning, for leaving the Soviet Union. And again, if you look at the nature of a multinational state, then, by and large, it is it that creates the potential to ensure the highest quality of governance, the highest quality of life, because many spheres of activity simply do not fit into the boundaries of such small national republics as, let's say, Lithuania. In order for people to open their potentials in many spheres of activity, a much larger society is required. Well, a society of a much larger size, larger in quantity of people, if it is multinational, and cultural politics are carried out in such a way that every child, regardless of nationality, can acquire any higher education, and in addition, cultural politics are carried out in such a way that ethics is not conditioned by national specifics and national inequality in this very state, in this case, the possibilities for the development of society will be the best in such a state. Whether such a state will be a melting pot of nations is a debatable question, because peculiar development is conditioned by natural geographical conditions, and national geographic conditions largely determine the character of national cultures. Well, if we don't touch upon the questions of ethics, because the objective laws of 6 groups, they are truly objective and universal. But everything that concerns biocenoses is the concretics of geographical localization, their certain productivity, which dictated certain economic structures in the early stages of the building of the state and civilization. Therefore, national specifics does exist. It is largely conditioned by nature and geography. Here, N.S. Gumilyov is right. But on the other hand, as civilization develops, an artificial habitat appears, which should also take into account human biology. But on the other hand, it is such that it, in general, is largely independent of the natural geographical environment. Therefore, the economic structure of a highly civilized society is simply doomed to erase many factors inherited from the past. Undoubtedly, the realization of man as a creator in many cases may require that he leave his native place for another, which is hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. This is science, sometimes artistic creation. Does he cease to be a representative of his nation? No, he doesn't. His children can preserve the national culture, or they can absorb a certain common culture, introducing into it some of their own national peculiarity. Therefore, these are processes that in a normal state should flow organically, including processes of migration. And it so happens that cadre politics, that is, the question of how people gain access to bodies of state power in general, how people are transferred from working in apparatus positions to positions in which the signature and the word give the power-wielding force to govern aerial decisions, is a certain superstructure over demographic politics, since, depending on what kind of demographic politics is pursued by the state, such will be the prospects and possibilities for cadre politics. You see, the elite corporate state is interested in the question of how to carry out slavery in such forms so that, on one hand, the elite have enough of everything, and on the other hand, so that the slaves do not stick their nose where they should not, and are satisfied with what they have. And this circumstance, both within the borders of the state and on a global scale, leads to the fact that demographic politics, both global and carried out within the state by elite corporate mafias, and above all by freemasonry, can be politics of genocide in relation to certain nations, which for some reason are regarded as bad slaves. If you look at the global level, then the number one global problem is the biospheric-social ecological crisis. By whom has it been generated? It has been generated by Western civilization, in which the development of the technosphere has outpaced Ravia's ethical development. The fact that it would be generated was already clear to the most far-sighted people at the end of the 18th, the beginning of the 19th century, if not earlier. They tried to prevent it, because if we analyze Marxism as a cultural phenomenon, then this is a project of global reconstruction, which was supposed to put an end to the race of consumption and financial excessiveness. Marxism assumed to provide everyone with prosperity, to provide everyone with a certain level of education, to eliminate the consumption race. That is, there were supposed to be no shanties or palaces, but there was supposed to be something where a person could live in sufficiency, but without poverty and without luxury, when dozens and sometimes thousands of people work for one person to support his estate. But Marxism was supposed to preserve the elite corporate, in essence mafia character of power over society, because the political economy of Marxism is metrologically inconsistent. There is no psychology in Marxism at all. The class approach, yes, there are certain statistics on the mentality of classes. These statistics are different, but interpenetrating. And the fact that the class approach describes a certain statistical mass and ignores the tails of statistical distributions is one of the indicators of primitivism. Moreover, primitivism, which makes it possible to use Marxism as a screen curtain for organizing factual governance, because this is the truth-likeness of Marxism, the superficiality of coverage in it of many questions of social governance, economic governance. They provide a person of the crowd, who himself being narrowly specialized, does not deal with these aspects of life, and who has a certain conceptual satisfaction, that is, if asked, he can explain. And those who really govern, they in fact should belong to a certain mafia of like-minded people, who are not a crowd, but who shoulder the mission of corporate governance towards this crowd. If we turn to Soviet literature, then many science fiction writers wrote about the future. The Hour of the Bull, the Andromeda Nebula by Ivan Antonovich Yefremov, do not have any mafia which would differ from the rest of society in terms of worldview and ethics. As it is known, in the last years of his life, after the publication of The Hour of the Bull, Ivan Antonovich had problems in relation to the State Security Committee, the KGB. The Hour of the Bull, after it was published for the first time, was not published for some time, and was withdrawn from general accessibility in libraries, although it was not included in the list of prohibited books. The film adaptation, based on The Hour of the Bull, was not made in the Soviet Union or in the USA, although Stanley Kubrick wanted it. The film adaptation of the Andromeda Nebula got stuck after the release of the first episode. The second episode was not released. Why? Because for those so-called art critics in plain clothes who understand that culture is an informational algorithmic system and an instrument for organizing structureless governance, the future that Yefremov painted was unacceptable, not because it was life inconsistent. Yefremov painted it as life consistent, but because he attracted special attention to the question of the personal development of people, and he always believed that communism would take place not because everyone would be molded according to one template, according to one standard, He believed that communism would take place because all people in society would master their genetic potential, reach such a level of development, first of all, nravious and ethical, when for them communism would become simply an alternativeless way of organizing the life of society. They did not argue with Yefremov, did not refute, but simply stopped the adaptation of the Andromeda Nebula, did not support the adaptation of the Hour of the Bull, created problems in his personal life. It is possible that these problems led him to death before he could write the novel which was supposed to be dedicated to ancient Egypt. Well, there are other science fiction writers, the Strugatsky brothers, extremely popular. They were even forgiven for the tale of the Troika. The tale of the Troika, their tale, very ironically ridiculed the Soviet bureaucracy, very relevantly, very critically, and is still relevant up to now, so read it. They have a cycle dedicated to wanderers and progressors. Wanderers are a kind of extraterrestrial civilization that interferes with the life of other civilizations, including of the Earth. And the progressors, they are here. They also interfere in the life of other extraterrestrial civilizations based on earthly ideas about how it should be. There is a certain office on Earth called CONCOM. CONCOM is an acronym for Contact Commission. And in fact, the Contact Commission is the office of the intra-social mafia that controls the entire society which lives on the basis of self-evidences. The Contact Commission is headed by an excellence, and this is also a variant of the future. But unlike Andromeda Nebula, it presupposes and makes it obligatory to divide society into those who live under the power and those who organize this power and become divorced from society, living according to their own interests. And if from the point of view of this internal mafia and corporation, in society something is not as it should be, then in order for everything to be as it should, they can break the fates of people, they can suppress lives, if it is considered necessary. By and large, excellence is an enlightened tyrant. Due to the fact that he is enlightened, he does not usually say stupid things. He possesses some knowledge that others do not possess, and this makes him more functionally capable than everyone else. But since he is enlightened, the governance as a whole ensures the satisfaction of the vital needs of all people, but excludes one thing. Power is not accessible. Power can be accessible only with the sanction of this very CONCOM mafia. These Strugatsky brothers went into promotion and propaganda. Well, then the next question arises, and this happens somehow by itself? From the point of view of an ordinary person who does not think about how governance is carried out in society, yes, this is a self-evidence. It's just that the works of the Strugatsky brothers is more interesting to readers than the Hour of the Bull and the Andromeda Nebula. But if you understand how social governance is organized, if you understand that the state apparatus cannot help but be permeated by mafias, and the mafias exist there, and the mafias specialize there, according to their own interests at different levels of the hierarchy of the generalized means, then this doesn't somehow happen by itself. It is just that a certain mafia imposed a prohibition on the propaganda of the envisioning of the future that Yefremov proposed. And the mafia launched the promotion of the envisioning of the future, which the Strugatsky brothers created, and subtly flattered Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov, creating a bright image of excellence in their works. And then the question arises, how? You see, if the system of unformalized ties between people, with a dynamic distribution of responsibilities and powers inevitably arises, if they inevitably arise, they inevitably penetrate into the state apparatus, into business. After all, how to live further in such conditions? The classics in Soviet times, the film Unbelievable Adventures of Italians in Russia. The mafia is immortal. Yes, this is a postulate, the main political postulate. If the nature of state governance is for some reason unacceptable, then this nature is conditioned by the fact that the state apparatus, organizational staff structures, are under the control of certain mafias. If there is some unacceptable mafia that effectively realizes its objectives in society, then only a more effective mafia can neutralize it or destroy it. It is clear that from the standpoint of the law enforcement agencies, the sixth priority is a structural method of governance, the penetration of agents into the enemy's structures. This task is not solved for two reasons. The first one is that the sixth priority is the lowest. The second reason is that quite a big amount of the agents being implanted has always been re-recruited by the structures where they were implanted. After they were re-recruited, they were either double agents or ensured the re-recruitment in their own structure of young promising cadres who made a career, and as a result the structure, the initiator of the re-recruitment, itself was under the control of the structure into which it wanted to penetrate. This is a direct consequence of the fact that the sixth priority is the lowest, and everyone, to the measure of his understanding, works for himself, and to the measure of the difference in understanding, works for those who understand more. Since those who are interested in financial wealth see money as an objective, respectively, money is their master. But on the third priority, the same money is already an instrument for achieving some objectives outside of finance, but through finance. And accordingly, the owners of this or that money, from their point of view, are just a resource. They are walking wallets. And in this respect, the proverb comes to mind, where a mighty army does not pass, that is, it is where the sixth priority is ineffective, a donkey loaded with gold will pass. The donkey in this proverb can be a metaphor, since it's presented in the form of a respectable person or a businesswoman who works in a certain field and does not understand that the value for society, for politicians, is not this or that amount of money, not the nominal money, but the financial credit system as an instrument of governance. The financial credit system as an instrument of governance is subordinated to the third priority. And depending on what theories at the level of the third priority are proposed in schools and universities that talk about economics and finance, such will be the governance towards all this. But, you see, the level of the third priority is also not self-sufficient, because one can be well-read, like E.T. Gaidar, but one may not feel life as such, and be unable to consciously comprehend what is sensed. And accordingly, if a person is not able to consciously comprehend on his own what he senses, he cannot have questions about the metrological consistency of certain theories and discrepancies between theories and the practice of politics and real life. Therefore, those who feel good to be in the periphery of the Masonic mafia and believe that it does not exist, having some standard knowledge attributed to the third priority of the generalized means, live like this. Those who have reached certain degrees of initiation and know perfectly well that the function of Freemasonry is to manipulate the profanes, and that all people are brothers to a greater or lesser degree, but this is visible only after the adoption of this certain degree, also live like this. But remember that you are not allowed above the third priority, for the simple reason that you were not selected, because you are one of those people who have no idea that there is something higher, above the third priority. Well, above the third priority, there is what is called Jret's power. Higher than the third priority, there is the first priority, personal gnosiological culture, and the second priority is historical algorithmic. That is, the algorithmics that psychodynamics carries, and which can be impacted regardless of what decisions are made by the State Department or the State Duma of the Russian Federation. In other words, we are really on the eve of the formation of a mafia that masters the first, second priorities, and further on, having mastered the first and second priorities, it is fated to be the most effective mafia among those who operate on the lower priorities, according to the worldview of the participants of each of the mafias. Such a mafia in Russian is called subordinist. In the Quran it is not characterized as subordinist. The Quran simply says, "And let there be of you a community, calling others to good, and commanding that which is reputable, and prohibiting that which is disreputable, and these they are the blissful." But nowhere in the Quran is it said that the nravious ethical qualities of people belonging to this community should be somehow different, but not general human qualities. This community stands out from the rest of society, not according to the principle of some specific corporate ethics and raviousness. It stands out from society solely because it possesses and masters, at a professional level, the knowledge and skills that other members of society do not possess at the professional level, But if they want to master them, they will join this community. They will enter into it. Therefore, a mafia will take shape, a mafia that covers the first and second priorities, and accordingly is able to subjugate the lower priorities. And this mafia in Russian is called subordinist, because it's oriented on social development, and accordingly on personal development, in line with the previousness of all people. But state power, as a system of governance towards the affairs of society on a professional basis, will also exist, but will change its character. It will not be of an elite corporate character. It will be all people, in the sense that the whole society is a cadre base for its replenishment, on the basis that everyone will have access to knowledge and skills for mastering, allowing entry into the sphere of state power, and to exercise state power not for the interests of a narrow corporation, but for the interests of social development, that is, for the interests of everyone except parasites.